Picture this. August 15, 1818. A baby girl is born into slavery in Hancock, Georgia. She'll spend the next 37 years in chains. She'll be forced to walk 1,700 miles across America with a newborn strapped to her back. She'll be denied the right to even speak in a courtroom. And yet, by the time she dies, she'll be one of the wealthiest people in California, owning property worth millions in today's money. She'll become the first black woman to win her freedom in a California court. She'll found the first black church in Los Angeles. And she'll be known throughout the city as Grandma Mason, the woman who put the angel in Los Angeles. Her name was Biddy Mason. And her story isn't just about survival. It's about a transformation so complete, so impossible, that it challenges everything we think we know about what's possible when the entire world is stacked against you. But here's the question that haunts historians to this day. How did a woman who couldn't legally testify in court, who had no formal education, who started with literally nothing, outsmart the legal system, build a real estate empire, and become one of the most influential philanthropists in Los Angeles history? What did she understand about power, about freedom, about wealth, that even educated people of her time didn't grasp? Stay until the end, because the answer will change how you see every obstacle in your own life. Let's start where her story begins, in the brutal reality of American slavery. Biddy Mason, born Bridget Mason, came into this world as property, not as a person, as property. In Georgia in 1808, that's what it meant to be born, black and enslaved. You weren't a human being with rights, you were an asset on someone's ledger, a thing to be bought and sold. We don't know much about her early childhood. The records from that time didn't consider enslaved children worth documenting. She was sold as an infant to new masters, passed from Georgia to South Carolina and back to Mississippi like a piece of furniture. Historians tell us nothing about her parents, nothing about whether she had siblings, nothing about what she felt, what she dreamed, what she hoped for. Because enslaved people weren't supposed to feel, they weren't supposed to dream, they weren't supposed to hope. Around 1836, when Biddy was about 18 years old, she was purchased by a man named Robert Marion Smith and his wife Rebecca. Smith owned a plantation in Mississippi. He was also a Mormon convert, which becomes important later in this story. Smith put Biddy to work as a nurse and midwife. And this is where something remarkable begins to happen. Because while Biddy was enslaved, while she had no freedom, while she had no rights, she was learning. She was learning from other enslaved people how to deliver babies, how to use medicinal herbs, how to care for the sick, how to heal. Think about this for a second. In the midst of one of history's most dehumanizing systems, enslaved people were teaching each other skills, passing down knowledge, building expertise. They couldn't own property, they couldn't learn to read or write, but they could learn to heal, and they did. They created their own systems of medical knowledge, combining African healing traditions with Native American herbal medicine and whatever European medical knowledge they could access. Biddy absorbed all of it. She became known as someone who could handle difficult births, someone who could treat illnesses, someone who had a gift for healing. She was building skills that would one day change everything. During her time enslaved by the Smiths, Biddy gave birth to 3 daughters: Ellen, born around 1838, Anne, born around 1844, and Harriet, born around 1847. Records suggest these children may have been fathered by Robert Smith himself. This was the horror of slavery. Enslaved women had no control over their own bodies, no protection, no recourse, no way to say no. But Biddy loved her daughters, and everything she would do from this point forward, every risk she would take, every battle she would fight, would be for them. They were her reason, her purpose, her future. Then in 1848, when Biddy was 30 years old, her life got even harder. Robert Smith decided to join a Mormon pioneer caravan heading west to California. The Mormon Church was establishing settlements in the West, and Smith wanted to be part of that movement. He was taking his property with him, including Biddy. including her 3 daughters, including at least 50 other enslaved people. What happened next was one of the most brutal forced marches in American history. Imagine walking 1,700 miles. That's roughly the distance from New York City to Denver. Now imagine walking that distance behind a wagon train, not riding in the wagons, walking behind them, in the dust, in the heat, through deserts and over mountains. Now imagine doing it while enslaved, while caring for 3 young daughters, while carrying a newborn baby strapped to your back. That's what Biddy Mason did. The caravan consisted of 300 wagons. At least 50 enslaved people were forced to make this journey. Biddy walked at the very back of the wagon train. Day after day, week after week, month after month, her feet bleeding, her back aching from the weight of the baby, her daughters struggling to keep up. Let me paint you a picture of what this actually looked like. Every morning before dawn, the camp would wake. The white families would pack their wagons, eat breakfast, prepare for the day. Biddy and the other enslaved people would do all the work, breaking down tents, packing supplies, pitching horses, preparing food, caring for children, all before the sun rose. Then the wagons would start moving, and Biddy would start walking behind the last wagon, in a cloud of dust so thick you could barely breathe, with the sun beating down, with her baby strapped to her back, with Ellen, who was about 10 years old, trying to help with her younger sisters. Historical accounts mention that she may have had chains on her ankles during parts of this journey. Chains while walking 1,700 miles, while carrying a baby, while caring for her children. Can you imagine the physical pain, the metal cutting into your skin with every step? The weight of the chains adding to the weight of the baby, the impossibility of it. But she kept walking, because she had no choice. The terrain was brutal. They crossed the Great Plains, where the heat was so intense that people died of heat stroke. They crossed deserts where water was scarce and the sun was merciless. They crossed mountains where the cold at night was as dangerous as the heat during the day. And through all of it, Biddy was working. Because she wasn't just walking, she was the midwife for the entire caravan. When women went into labor, Biddy delivered their babies. When people got sick, Biddy treated them. When children needed care, Biddy provided it. She delivered babies while walking 1,700 miles. Think about that. A woman in labor can't walk, so the caravan would stop. Biddy would help deliver the baby. And then, as soon as the mother could be moved into a wagon, the caravan would start moving again, and Biddy would start walking again. She treated illnesses with whatever herbs she could find along the trail. She cared for people who were suffering from dysentery, from fever, from exhaustion. She kept people alive. And she kept her own daughters alive. Ellen was old enough to walk on her own, but she was just a child. Anne was only 4 years old. Harriet was a baby. Biddy had to make sure they had water, make sure they had food, make sure they didn't fall behind, make sure they survived. Every single day for months. Historians estimate the journey took somewhere between 5 and 7 months. That's 150 to 210 days of walking, of suffering, of enduring, of surviving. But here's what's remarkable. Somewhere during that impossible journey, something shifted inside Biddy Mason, because she was walking toward California. And California, as of 1850, was a free state. California had entered the Union with a constitution that explicitly banned slavery, which meant that technically, the moment Biddy crossed into California, she was supposed to be free. She knew this. Somehow, despite being enslaved, despite having no formal education, despite having no access to newspapers or legal documents, Biddy Mason knew that California was a free state. Maybe she heard it from other enslaved people in the caravan. Maybe she overheard white people talking. Maybe someone told her. We don't know how she knew, but she knew. And that knowledge changed everything. Because now she wasn't just walking to survive, she was walking toward freedom. Every step was a step closer to a place where slavery was illegal. Every mile was a mile closer to a chance. That hope, that knowledge, that possibility, it sustained her through the worst parts of the journey. When her feet were bleeding and she didn't think she could take another step, she thought about California. When the baby was crying and she was exhausted and she wanted to give up, she thought about freedom. When her daughters were suffering and she felt helpless, she thought about a future where they might be free. Hope is a powerful thing. Even in the darkest circumstances, even in the most impossible situations, hope can keep you moving forward. And Biddy Mason had hope. But here's where it gets complicated. Because America in the 1850s was a nation at war with itself, not yet shooting at each other, but tearing itself apart over the question of slavery. And California was caught right in the middle of that contradiction. See, California's constitution said no slavery. But the Federal Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, passed as part of the same compromise that made California a free state, said that enslaved people had to be returned to their enslavers. Even in free states, even in California. California even had its own state fugitive slave law that enforced slavery despite the constitutional ban. It was a legal paradox. A free state that enforced slavery, a place where you could be simultaneously free and enslaved depending on which law you looked at. So when Biddy Mason arrived in California in 1851, after walking 700 miles, she was technically in a free state. But she wasn't free. Robert Smith still claimed to own her. Still claimed to own her daughters. And the law, contradictory as it was, backed him up. For 4 years, Biddy lived as an enslaved woman in a free state. She worked for the Smiths in San Bernardino, where they had settled. She cared for her daughters. She delivered babies throughout the Los Angeles community. She built a reputation as a skilled midwife and healer. People of all races came to her for medical care. White families, Mexican families, Native American families, black families. She didn't discriminate. She helped everyone, and everyone respected her skill. She was becoming known, becoming valued, becoming indispensable to the community. And she was watching, she was learning, she was planning. Because Biddy Mason was planning something that would require perfect timing, something that would require courage most people can't imagine, something that would either free her family or destroy any chance they had. In 1855, everything came to a head. Robert Smith decided he was going to leave California and move to Texas. Texas was a slave state. If he got Biddy and her daughters to Texas, they would be legally enslaved again with no hope of freedom. California's contradictions at least gave them a chance. Texas would give them nothing. Smith started making preparations to leave. He was going to take Biddy, her 3 daughters, and 10 other enslaved people with him. He planned to leave in secret, quickly, before anyone could stop him. But Biddy had met someone, a man named Robert Owens, a freed slave who had become a prosperous business owner in Los Angeles. Owens was a successful entrepreneur. He owned a livery stable. He had money. He had connections. He had influence in the community. And he saw what was happening. He saw that Smith was about to take these people to Texas, and he knew that once they crossed the state line, they'd be lost forever. So Owens did something extraordinary. He went to the authorities, he told them what Smith was planning, and he helped Biddy file a petition for a writ of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus. It's a legal term that means produce the body. It's a demand that someone being held against their will be brought before a court. It's one of the most fundamental rights in American law. And Biddy Mason, an enslaved woman with no formal education, was using it to challenge her enslaver. Think about the courage this took. If she lost, Smith would take her to Texas and she'd never see freedom. He might separate her from her daughters. He might punish her for daring to challenge him. He might make her life even worse than it already was. But if she won, she'd be free. Her daughters would be free. They'd have a chance at a real life. So she took the risk. She filed the petition. The case was called Mason v. Smith. And it would be heard by Judge Benjamin Hayes of the District Court of the First Judicial District of California. Now here's where we need to understand just how impossible this was. California law in 1856 barred people of color from testifying in court against white people. Read that again. Biddy Mason could file a petition, but she couldn't testify. She couldn't tell her story. She couldn't speak in her own defense. The system was designed to make sure she would lose. Robert Smith had lawyers. He had money. He had the law on his side. He had every advantage. Biddy had Robert Owens. She had the truth. And she had a judge who was willing to listen. But Judge Benjamin Hayes was about to do something that would change legal history. On January 19, 1856, the hearing began. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread throughout Los Angeles about this case. People wanted to see what would happen. Would this enslaved woman actually win her freedom? Or would the system crush her like it had crushed so many others? The atmosphere was tense. Records from the time describe it as febrile, intense, emotional. This wasn't just another legal case. This was a test of California's identity. Was it really a free state? Or was that just words on paper? Judge Hayes looked at the law. He saw that Biddy couldn't testify publicly, so he made a decision. He would interview her privately, in his chambers, away from the courtroom, away from the public record. This was unprecedented. Judges didn't do this, but Hayes did it anyway. He brought Biddy into his chambers, and he listened to her story. He listened to her describe the forced march from Mississippi. He listened to her describe her life in California. He listened to her describe Smith's plan to take her and her daughters to Texas. We don't have a transcript of that conversation. We don't know exactly what Biddy said, but we know the effect it had. Because, according to witnesses, Judge Hayes was clearly rattled by what he heard. He was visibly upset. He was angry. The written verdict is dry, legal language. But witnesses said the atmosphere in and around that courtroom was electric. People could feel that something important was happening. Judge Hayes deliberated for 3 days. 3 days. He was wrestling with a massive decision. He was a judge in a state with contradictory laws. He was being asked to free enslaved people in a nation that was tearing itself apart over slavery. He was being asked to rule against a white man in favor of a black woman who couldn't even legally testify. He knew that whatever he decided would set a precedent. It would affect other cases. It would send a message about what California stood for. And on the third day, Judge Benjamin Hayes made his ruling. He declared that Biddy Mason, her 3 daughters, and 10 other enslaved people were entitled to their freedom. He stated in his order that Robert Smith had intended to remove them for his own use. And he made it clear that this would not stand. Court records from the District Court of the First Judicial District show that Hayes wrote, "All of the said persons of color are entitled to their freedom and are free forever." Biddy Mason was free after 37 years in slavery, after walking 1,700 miles, after years of planning and waiting and hoping. She was free, and so were her daughters. Let me pause here for a second, because we need to understand what just happened. A woman who was born as property, who was bought and sold like livestock, who couldn't legally speak in a courtroom, just defeated the entire system of slavery in a court of law. She found an ally. She found a judge willing to bend the rules, and she won. This was the first time a black woman won her freedom in a California court. The first time. But here's the thing. Freedom was just the beginning, because now Biddy had to figure out how to survive, how to build a life, how to support her daughters, how to make it in a world that still saw her as less than human. She had her skills as a midwife and nurse. That was it. No money, no property, no safety net, just her knowledge and her determination. So Biddy went to work. She started delivering babies throughout Los Angeles. She worked as a nurse. She built her reputation. And according to IRS tax records from 1862, she paid $10 for a license as a physician. That's right, a physician. A woman who had been enslaved just 6 years earlier was now a licensed medical professional. She worked for a doctor named Dr. Griffin. He paid her $2.50 a day. That doesn't sound like much, but in the 1850s and 1860s it was a decent wage. More importantly, it was her wage, money she earned, money she controlled, money she could save. And save she did. For 10 years, Biddy Mason saved money. She delivered hundreds of babies. She cared for the sick. She earned the trust of the entire Los Angeles community. People of all races came to her for medical care. She became known throughout the city. Think about what this means. A formerly enslaved black woman was being trusted by white families to deliver their babies, to care for their children, to treat their illnesses. In an era of intense racial prejudice, Biddy's skill transcended racial barriers. People didn't care about her race when they needed her help. They cared about her ability to heal. She worked long hours. She was on call day and night. When someone went into labor at 3 in the morning, Biddy went. When a child was sick with fever, Biddy came. When someone was injured, Biddy treated them. And she saved $2.50 at a time, day after day, year after year, until she had accumulated what was described as a princely sum for that era, $250. Now, what would you do with $250? In the 1860s, that was real money. You could live on it for a while. You could buy supplies. You could secure your family's immediate needs. Most people would have spent it on comfort, on security, on immediate needs. But Biddy Mason didn't do any of those things, because Biddy Mason understood something that most people don't understand. She understood that real freedom doesn't come from wages. It comes from ownership. It comes from assets. It comes from property. She had watched wealthy people in Los Angeles. She had delivered their babies. She had been in their homes. She had seen how they built wealth. And she understood that the key was property, land, real estate, things that would grow in value over time. On November 28, 1866, at 48 years old, Biddy Mason made a decision that would change everything. She took her $250 and she bought property. 2 contiguous lots on Spring Street in Los Angeles. The property was bounded by Spring Street, 4th Street, which is now Broadway, and 3rd and 4th Streets. At the time, this was on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Los Angeles was a tiny pueblo, a small town of maybe 5,000 people. Spring Street wasn't prime real estate. It was just land on the edge of town. Most people thought she was crazy to buy land there. But Biddy saw something others didn't see. She saw that Los Angeles was growing. She saw that this little pueblo was going to become a city. She saw that land on the outskirts today would be downtown tomorrow. She saw that the railroad was coming. She saw that California was booming. She saw opportunity where others saw empty land. She was right. Over the next 25 years, Los Angeles exploded in size. The population grew from 5,000 to over 50,000. The railroad arrived in 1876, connecting Los Angeles to the rest of the country. Businesses moved in. Buildings went up. The city expanded. And Biddy's property on Spring Street went from the outskirts to the heart of downtown. That land she bought for $250 became some of the most valuable real estate in California. But she didn't stop with one purchase. She kept working, she kept saving, and she kept buying property. She acquired multiple properties throughout the Los Angeles area. She became a real estate investor, a landlord, a businesswoman. She bought property on Figueroa Street. She bought property on Broadway. She bought property in what would become the commercial center of Los Angeles. Every time she saved enough money, she bought more land. And she was smart about it. She bought property that was undervalued, property that others overlooked, property that had potential. And then she held on to it. She didn't flip properties for quick profits. She built long-term wealth. She also built structures on her properties. She constructed rental units. She leased commercial space. She generated income from her real estate holdings. She wasn't just sitting on land. She was actively managing a real estate portfolio. By the 1880s, Biddy Mason was one of the wealthiest people in Los Angeles. Not just one of the wealthiest black people, one of the wealthiest people, period. By the time she died in 1891, her real estate holdings were valued at $300,000 in 1891 dollars. That's the equivalent of somewhere between $6 and $10 million today. Some accounts say her downtown property alone was worth nearly $8 million. Let me say that again. A woman who was born into slavery, who walked 1,700 miles behind a wagon train, who started with nothing, built a real estate empire worth millions. She became known as the richest colored woman west of the Mississippi. She was one of the wealthiest people in California. But here's where Biddy Mason's story becomes even more remarkable, because she didn't just accumulate wealth, she gave it away. In 1872, Biddy gathered 8 formerly enslaved black men in her home, and together they founded the first African Methodist Episcopal Church of Los Angeles, the first black church in the city. Biddy donated a portion of her own land for the church's construction. Her home served as the meeting place until the building was complete. That church still exists today. It's a landmark in Los Angeles, a testament to Biddy's vision and generosity. The congregation has grown to thousands of members. It's been a center of black community life in Los Angeles for over 150 years. But that was just the beginning of her philanthropy. Biddy Mason became known throughout Los Angeles for her charitable work. She visited prisoners in local jails regularly. She brought them food, she talked to them, she prayed with them. She saw them as human beings when society saw them as criminals. She provided food and shelter for the poor of all races, not just black people, all races. In an era of intense racial segregation, Biddy's charity knew no color line. If you were hungry, she fed you. If you needed shelter, she housed you. If you needed help, she helped you. In 1884, flash flooding destroyed homes across Los Angeles. People lost everything. Families were left homeless. Children were hungry. The community was devastated. And Biddy Mason went to the Spring Street grocery store and opened a tab. She told the store to provide supplies to flood victims, whatever they needed: food, clothing, blankets, medicine. She would pay for it. She didn't ask if they were black or white. She didn't ask if they were Christian or not. She didn't ask if they deserved help. She just helped. She founded a traveler's aid center to help people passing through Los Angeles who needed assistance. She donated to numerous charities. She supported schools. She helped build hospitals. She became known as Grandma Mason, the woman who put the angel in Los Angeles. People throughout the city knew her, loved her, respected her. Think about this for a second. She was building a real estate empire and simultaneously giving away her wealth. She was accumulating property and using it to help others. She was becoming rich and becoming more generous at the same time. This wasn't a woman who escaped slavery and then pulled the ladder up behind her. This was a woman who understood that her freedom meant nothing if others weren't free, that her wealth meant nothing if others were suffering, that her success was only meaningful if she used it to lift others up. She became recognized as the first philanthropist in Los Angeles, not the first black philanthropist, the first philanthropist, period. Before there were organized charities in Los Angeles, there was Biddy Mason helping people. If this story of strategic transformation through ownership and generous community building inspires you, share it with someone who needs to hear that economic empowerment and compassion aren't opposites, but partners in lasting change. Now, I need to tell you something that makes this story even more powerful. Despite everything Biddy Mason accomplished, despite her extraordinary life, we don't have a single recorded quote from her. Not one. No letters, no diary entries, no recorded statements. No testimony from the court proceedings. The woman who changed Los Angeles, who built an empire, who freed herself and her daughters through the legal system, left no words behind. Her story survives entirely through legal documents, tax records, and other people's accounts of her life. In a way, that makes her transformation even more remarkable, because she didn't need words. Her actions spoke louder than anything she could have said. Her life was the message. Her transformation was the testimony. But we do know some things about what she believed, because we can see it in what she did. We know she believed in education, because she made sure her daughters and grandchildren had opportunities she never had. We know she believed in community, because she founded a church and supported countless charitable causes. We know she believed in justice, because she fought for her freedom in court and then used her wealth to help others. We know she believed in the power of ownership, because she didn't just work for wages. She bought property, she built assets, she created generational wealth. And we know she believed in generosity because she could have hoarded her wealth, she could have lived in luxury, she could have focused solely on her own family's security, but instead she gave, constantly, generously, without regard for race or background. Her daughter Ellen remembered her mother firmly telling the family about the Spring Street property purchase. That memory survived. That moment when Biddy decided to invest everything she had saved into property, that was a turning point, not just for Biddy, but for her entire family line. And that family line continued. Ellen had children. One of them was named Hannah. Hannah had children. The family grew. And today, 6 generations later, Biddy Mason's descendants are still here. Cheryl Cox and Robin Cox, 6th-generation descendants, have been interviewed about their great-great-great-great-grandmother's legacy. Robin has 2 children, Daniel and Dakota, who represent the 7th generation. Think about what Biddy Mason passed down, not just property, though that mattered, not just wealth, though that changed her family's trajectory. She passed down a model, a blueprint, a way of being in the world. She showed her descendants that you can start with nothing and build everything, that you can face impossible odds and win, that you can be generous and successful at the same time, that you can transform yourself and transform your community. That's a legacy that goes beyond money. That's a legacy that changes how people see themselves and what they believe is possible. Her descendants talk about feeling the weight of that legacy, the responsibility, the pride. They know what their ancestor did. They know what she overcame. They know what she built, and they carry that forward. Now, Los Angeles didn't forget Biddy Mason. For a long time, her story was known mainly in the Black community, but in the 1980s there was a movement to recognize her contributions more broadly. On November 16, 1989, Los Angeles officially declared Biddy Mason Day. The next day, November 17, the Biddy Mason Memorial Park opened. It's located on the south side of the Broadway Spring Center, between Broadway and Spring Streets, right near where she purchased her first property at 331 Spring Street. The memorial features an 81-foot-long timeline made of poured concrete. It documents her entire life, from her birth in 1818 to her death in 1891, from slavery to freedom to wealth to philanthropy. The whole extraordinary journey preserved in concrete and memory. It's designated as an African-American public history site, a place where people can come and learn about this remarkable woman, a place where her story is told to new generations. And that's important, because Biddy Mason's story isn't just history. It's not just an inspiring tale from the past. It's a roadmap, it's a guide, it's proof of what's possible. But here's what I want you to understand. Biddy Mason's transformation wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even just about her individual brilliance, though she was clearly brilliant. Her transformation was the result of specific decisions made at specific moments. And if we look closely at those decisions, we can learn something about how transformation actually works. Remember that question I asked at the beginning? How did a woman who couldn't legally testify in court, who had no formal education, who started with literally nothing, outsmart the legal system, build a real estate empire, and become one of the most influential philanthropists in Los Angeles history? Here's the answer. And I want you to pay attention, because this is the key to understanding not just Biddy Mason's transformation, but any transformation from impossible circumstances to extraordinary achievement. Biddy Mason understood 3 things that most people never grasp. First, she understood that freedom isn't given, it's taken. She didn't wait for someone to free her. She didn't hope that slavery would end. She didn't pray that her enslaver would have a change of heart. When she saw an opportunity, when Robert Smith tried to move her to Texas, she acted. She filed that petition. She took the risk. She fought for her freedom in a system designed to keep her enslaved. Most people wait for permission. They wait for the right moment. They wait for circumstances to change. Biddy didn't wait. She forced the circumstances to change. Second, she understood that real power comes from ownership. She could have worked as a midwife her entire life. She could have earned wages and lived comfortably. But she knew that wages are temporary and ownership is permanent. So she saved every penny she could. And then she bought property. She bought assets. She bought things that would grow in value, things that would generate wealth, things that would last beyond her lifetime. Most people trade their time for money and then spend that money on things that lose value. Biddy traded her time for money and then bought things that gained value. That's the difference between working for a living and building wealth. Third, she understood that transformation isn't complete until it includes others. She didn't just free herself, she freed her daughters. She didn't just build wealth for herself, she used that wealth to help her community. She founded a church, she helped flood victims, she visited prisoners. She fed the poor. Most people think success is about individual achievement. Biddy knew that real success is about collective elevation. She knew that her freedom meant nothing if others remained enslaved, that her wealth meant nothing if others remained poor, that her transformation was only complete when she helped others transform. These three principles, freedom is taken, power comes from ownership, transformation includes others. They aren't just historical observations, they're active principles. They work today just like they worked in 1856. Think about your own life. What freedom are you waiting for permission to take? What ownership are you avoiding because it seems too hard or too risky? What transformation are you keeping to yourself instead of using to help others? Biddy Mason walked 1,700 miles in chains and still found a way to become one of the most powerful people in California. What's your excuse? I don't mean that harshly. I mean it as a challenge. Because if Biddy Mason could transform her life from those circumstances, with those obstacles, with that level of systemic oppression, then what's actually stopping you? Not what feels like it's stopping you, not what seems impossible, what is actually, truly, objectively preventing you from taking the next step toward your own transformation. Because here's what Biddy Mason's story proves. The size of your obstacles doesn't determine the scope of your transformation. The depth of your oppression doesn't limit the height of your achievement. The circumstances of your birth don't define the legacy of your life. Biddy was born as property. She died as one of the wealthiest and most respected people in Los Angeles. That's not a small transformation. That's not a moderate improvement. That's a complete reinvention of what was possible. And she did it without any of the advantages we take for granted today. No formal education, no legal rights, no family wealth, no social connections, no safety net, nothing. Just skills she learned from other enslaved people, a mind sharp enough to see opportunities others missed, courage enough to take risks that could have destroyed her, and a heart generous enough to share everything she gained. You have access to education Biddy never had. You have legal rights she fought her entire life to gain. You have opportunities she couldn't even imagine. So what are you building with those advantages? What risks are you taking? What are you giving back? Because transformation isn't about your circumstances. It's about your decisions. It's about what you do with what you have. It's about how you respond when everything is stacked against you. So here's my challenge to you. Don't just be inspired by Biddy Mason's story. Learn from it, study it, apply it. Take one principle, just one, and put it into action this week. Maybe you take something that's yours. Maybe you assert a boundary. Maybe you claim a freedom you've been waiting for permission to claim. Maybe you make an investment. Maybe you buy something that will grow in value instead of something that will lose value. Maybe you help someone. Maybe you share something you've been hoarding. Maybe you lift someone up instead of climbing alone. Just one thing, one decision, one action, one step toward your own transformation, because that's how it starts. Not with a grand plan, not with perfect circumstances, not with unlimited resources. It starts with one decision, one action, one step. Biddy Mason's transformation started with a petition. One piece of paper, one legal filing, one risk, and it ended with a legacy that's still changing lives 130 years after her death. Your transformation can start today, right now, with one decision. What will it be? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what freedom you're going to take, what ownership you're going to build, what transformation you're going to share, because your story matters just as much as Biddy's. Your transformation is just as possible. Your legacy is just as important.